Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Actual Magician's Bookshelf channel with me, Marcus Katz. And we will start by our usual saying that by our work we are changed. You'll have to excuse the fact that there isn't a bell ringing this time because the bell is packed with a lot of other things because I'm having to move. I thought I'd give a quick update if you'll indulge me on that so that I can tell people what it means for the channel over the next few weeks, or probably the next 4 weeks, and I'll let everyone know where things are at, both on Facebook and on our community tab on the YouTube channel as well. And I thought today we'd have a look back where we started really with the tarot, look at some stuff about the great symbols of the tarot, maybe take some questions about tarot itself and the symbolism and so forth. So just a quick update then as to those who've been following my Facebook account, which I have quite a lot of stuff I tend to make public there. It's not specifically personal, but it does keep people updated as to what work we're doing, if we have any sales or offers on things, and what is going on behind the scenes as far as the new books and existing books are, and what courses we're writing and so forth. So so I was told that I was going to have to move from my rental property with very short notice. It's quite a reasonable rental property that I've been in for 3 years now, and I was given 10 weeks notice to just move. And because I live in the heart of the Lake District National Park, which is a wonderful place to be, but it has really been suffering over the years of a narrowing availability of local housing. And because of sharing my story online, and because I've been here 35 years and I help moderate the Keswick Locals group on Facebook, and I'm the admin of the Buy and Sell group and so forth. So I shared my story on there, and I was interviewed by the BBC a few days ago, and I'm talking to the Lake District National Park authorities and the local town councillor next week about the situation. Not that any of them are going to do anything about it, or any of them can actually assist my particular case or some of the other particular cases in Keswick that are happening as we speak because of a forthcoming change of the law in terms of renting in the UK, which has had inevitable consequences to all of the renters and the landlords in the UK. It's had a massive knock-on effect that should have been thought about before, but blatantly wasn't. So it is causing a lot of people a lot of problems at the moment, and it's exasperating and exacerbated in the Lake District National Park because there's so few local housing, because a lot of it has been sold for tourism lets and so forth. So at the moment I don't have anywhere yet to move to, so I now have 24 days to find somewhere. I'm seeing somewhere on Tuesday and somewhere on Thursday. One is actually in the area, one is slightly further away. So I'm having to move likely out of the area that I've been 35 years, which again is part of the problem that this change of the law has actually brought in. So my main problem really, as well as finding a roof, is that I have a lot of books. I have about 3,000 books, maybe more, possibly more. It depends if you count some of the role-playing books and the gaming books that I've collected over the last 35 years. And this year was actually going to be a divesting of a lot of those, particularly the ones that I've only ever used for research. They can go to other hands now. But this has accelerated that whole process. So, thank you so much, Tony. I have had 3, including your own wonderful offer, 3 different people offer me a place, which is wonderful. The issue with it is that if I move out for any length of time from the Lake District National Park itself, I will never get back in with a local occupancy. So it is, there are consequences to me taking up any particular, anyhow. So, the main issue with the books is actually finding somewhere to store them. Now, my old property that my ex-wife, who I get on with very, very well, in fact, we get on a lot better now, is still available. It's got 2 basements, and I'm basically moving everything to that. But I realised that that wasn't going to be enough for the books. Also, it was going to require too many huge plastic tubs. I estimated that I've got about 25 Kallax shelves, and a lot of them are double shelved. So there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, maybe about 50 books in each sort of block of a Kallax shelf. And there are 4 blocks to each shelf, and then multiply that by 25, and you'll get an idea of the sheer volume of books in the actual magician's bookshelf. So what I did today was I decided to take matters into my own hands a little bit more proactively, and I managed to find somewhere to actually store them, a big storage container, which is a bonkers thing. It wasn't on my bingo cards. It was on my tarot cards to some extent, that March would be a bonkers month. Thank you, Marie, as well, for the backup to the divinatory side of things, because I think we talked about it maybe last time or in one of the private members only videos about when people say, why don't you do a spell, or didn't you see this in your tarot cards? And the answer is yes, I did see something in the tarot cards, but it isn't quite what people would expect as a sort of fortune-telling device in that sense. It, in effect, for a lot of people, it would be actually a very contradictory reading for this particular month. But the fact that Charlotte encouraged me to do one for myself out of the blue in December, and I hadn't done a year ahead reading for myself for quite a number of years. I'm always doing them for other people and do other types of personal readings, but not a year ahead for myself. And the fact that I did one, and March was, even in December when I looked at it, I said, March is going to be absolutely incredible. Wow, look at these 3 cards. So they're sort of shining out of the whole year. And of course, entering into January, getting the news to have to move and so forth, meant looking back at that reading, why is March so incredible, so opening, so transformative? And it's more transformative for the fact that it is in the cards. It is always in the cards. And yes, that is the message from Tony, that life is life, things change, but we adapt. In the Symbolarium on Instagram that we started a little while ago, I've been doing all 32 symbols on the wheel. And the wheel is, again, I chose it for particular reasons, from Waite particularly, because Waite saw the Wheel of Fortune in the tarot as being something really, really important. In fact, he elevated it to the top position when he did his second deck, the secret Waite Trinic deck. And one of the main things that I'm writing about, almost to myself as well as to everyone else in the Symbolarium group, is that the wheel is a core symbol of the tarot. And partly that's why it has the Rota Tarot Torah thing on it. But the thing with the wheel, the most important thing about the wheel is and I've packed my magical wand away, so I can't use that as a pointer. The wands and certain devices got packed away first, is this here. The Sphinx on the wheel. Because the wheel is moving, so how can the Sphinx actually be sat on it like that? And that bit there, with the Sphinx on the wheel, is the most important thing about this card and the whole of the tarot. The secret is just here. That Sphinx, who is well known for being the holder of the riddle of life, what are the ages of man, what crawls in the morning, what has no legs in the morning, and that whole riddle type thing is deliberate. Eliphas Levi used it, but then Waite developed it a little bit to have the wheel moving and the Sphinx couchant upon it and not moving. And that paradox, that riddle, is the secret of life, existence, the divine quest, the magical quest. Everything is just there under that T, which is quite nice for tarot. And that is why Waite put this card, and why he explains it. He actually explains all of this in Pictorial Key to the Tarot, and in other articles like the Great Symbols of the Tarot that he wrote for the Occult Review, I think, that this symbol is of unity. It is the grand symbol of the Tarot. It's the ultimate symbol, because it's the circle, it's the pivot, it's the point of Kether and the entire universe in apparent motion. But it goes back to that wonderful Platonic thing that time is the moving likeness of eternity. Time is the moving likeness of eternity, in the same way that our awareness is a imagination of the divine unity coming to know itself. And all of those mystical koans and riddles and secret statements in mystery schools like Osiris is a black god, the whole rebirth symbolism, which I guess is more on the judgment card, but it all falls under that. It all falls under time and this mystery of finding the still point at the center of all existence, which is always present in everything, because God is a circle whose circumference is everywhere, or what is it, whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. I think that was Pascal that said that. But this idea of the divine unity and the paradox of us existing in some sort of separative state and yet the universe being one entire thing, that we could come to know it in that true reality of that, is the heart of all mystery schools, all spirituality, and the perennial philosophy that Aldous Huxley wrote about. And it's there in the tarot for Waite on this card. Phew. I didn't think we'd start off with that, but there we go. So the fact that Charlotte prompted me to do a reading is enough. And the fact that March was so obvious a month when I looked at it in December, a month before I was given the news about the whole year. And sorry, I was just reading some of the comments there. That shows me and proves, as it has done for years and years and years, that everything is connected, and the tarot is a way of reading into that connection. So, thank you, Peace Dragon. Yeah, we tend to have a reasonably chilled Friday evening discussion. We started off mainly looking at tarot and so forth, and we do tend to get around to that. But yeah, we seem to have developed a different vibe for the Friday evenings, just to get together and chat, have some questions, have some discussion, mainly from me, but in reaction to comments in the comment section as well. So please ask any questions, and we'll try and answer them if we can. Okay, so that's the first thing. Why don't you do a spell? And didn't you see this in your cards? Well, yes, I saw it in the cards, but not in the way you think. I just saw the fact that the universe is connected, so I can trust that process, that everything is meaningful when we make it meaningful. And the second thing about not doing a spell, I think I did do a video on that. I think I did that on TikTok, but the reason is because sometimes when there is a lot of turbulence in your actual path that has been, in effect, caused by the work that you are doing, then the last thing you want to do is throw more magic into it, because I described it as throwing a lot of hand grenades into a whirlpool of kittens. You don't know what's going to happen. You can't predict what's going to happen, but you do know one thing: it's going to be messy. It's going to be bloody and messy. And so sometimes you know when to hold back from doing a spell. And also, if you have been doing this a long time and know how spells work and know that they do, then quite often you know not to do one because you know it's going to work. And yeah, it's like throwing a spanner blindfold into a lot of open tumble dryers with the grenade fastened to the spanner. It may have some impact, but whether it's going to do what you want, whether it's going to, the consequences of it are sometimes difficult to predict when you've got your will set on something. Do a magical working for it. Sometimes it's more difficult to deal with the consequential ripples of the universe unknotting itself and reknotting it in a particular way according to your will, intent, and the reality that you are now tunneling the universe through, that there is a sense of impact with the consequences, and some of those consequences can be lifetime altering. So again, an actual magician knows when to not do a spell because they know that spells work. Non-actual magicians like to do spells for everything and so on, because not all of them are working, and because there's less consequence, because they're not necessarily doing them in an impactful way that actually then works. Because again, if you know it works, then you're far more careful about using them. So that's what's happening at the moment. I'm having to go with the wheel of this event because it actually, to some extent, derives from a magical oath I decided to take, a certain approach that I wanted to take to my life, and this is a result of that. So I'm not going to add more magic or spells to try and direct the consequences of this, which is a result of a magical working. And yeah, I do sigils. I used to use sigils quite a bit, but they are a little bit... I think for different people at different times, we tend to find better effect with different types of tool, I think. And sigils are a good tool for particular things at a particular time of your life, but it's not necessarily something I would think to do at the moment or these days. I guess my magical work is slightly different than that, generally speaking. I do cover sigils in the Magicka School course, on the spellcrafting course there. So this doesn't relate to the experience I had with Nuith, the Egyptian goddess of bandages. That was quite in the early days, I guess. But again, that was another great example. Would people like to hear that story just one more time before we go on to some actual tarot about Nuit and the appearance of an actual goddess in real life? I don't know if people have heard that story from me or not, but when I was first working with Liber Astarte, which is one of Crowley's magical workings, and it's basically a devotional exercise where you work with a goddess or god, and I think Peace Dragon. Okay. Don't send the link, please. Not at the moment, thank you. Or share it. Not at the moment, but maybe remind me in a month, okay? So, Liber Astarte is a working that's in Magic in Theory and Practice. It is, or Magic Book 4, and it's basically a 6-month working where you practice your devotional work. And on the Tree of Life, it's particularly suitable for the grade here for Netsack, because it's a little bit like something that you do below the veil, and to encapsulate the working and the practice and all of the things you've learned up until this point here. Okay. And it's very devotional, and it's interesting because a lot of people choose the deity for that based on a imbalance in their life. Crowley mentions this, but not a lot of people pick up on that most magicians are working with their unbalanced force, and that is why they've chosen that particular deity. You can tell a lot about a so-called magician by the god that they have as their deity or their preferred deity, or that they do working with, or that they teach how to get in contact with, or they teach courses on, and so forth. Crowley points out, and I don't think a lot of magicians actually, or would-be magicians actually read that bit, because it's one of the boring bits. It's not about summoning deities, that you shouldn't choose the first deity that you think of, because that is always coming from your unbalanced view of the universe, particularly when you're at that grade, but any of these other grades, these lower grades. And it's fine to do it, people do it, but actually a bit later on, we can look back on that and see how it came from our misunderstanding of the universe, our need for something, the necessity to work with that particular deity that drives us to do that. And that necessity is one of the core roots that we have to escape in the later grades. The necessity becomes irrelevant in your life later on. But way down there, that particular grade, it's like, oh, I'm going to work with this particular goddess or god. Now, the one I chose originally was Diana. And I wanted to work with Diana because I was doing a lot of Wicca and witchcraft at the time. I'd been doing that at that point for about 7 years. And I was hoping that I'd find some way of integrating my pagan, neo-pagan witchcraft Wicca work with my Kabbalah, Hermetic, Western esoteric work, and try and find some way of squaring them in the form of Diana. So I did all of the research ahead of time. Back then it was books, there was no internet, and prepared the altar, prepared the practices, and I was going to start it on a new moon, and lo and behold, that's what I was going to do it for 6 months, work according to the instructions that Crowley lays out in Liber Astarte, and then I could tick that off the list that I'd actually done that particular practice. The night before, I was quite excited. I had this dream, and it was a really, really powerful dream. And I'd already done some dream work for the OTO at that point as part of my application process for the Typhonian OTO. So a lot of stuff would come through in dreams. That was just my particular vehicle for messaging to the universe. And what happened is I had this particular dream, and it was the goddess of Sais. I got that as clear as day in my head when I woke up, the goddess of Sais, spelt S-A-I-S. And I thought, oh, is that a name of Diana? And when I woke up, it was a bright, sunny morning. I can remember it as clear as day even now. And I got some books out. I had a look around, found out that Sais was actually an ancient Egyptian place name. Got out my Wallace Budge Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, as it's known now, and looked up Sais, looked up the deity of Sais, and it was Neith, Isis's sister. And it was like, okay, Neith is the goddess of Sais. So, okay, I need to work with Neith then. And I had to scrap everything that I'd prepared for Diana, and I chose that morning, well, I didn't choose, I chose to change, but I was told deliberately, absolutely, irrevocably, in my dream, you've got to work with the goddess of Sais. So that was Neith. I looked through Wallace Budge's stuff, I looked through all of the other stuff, and I thought, well, the only thing I could tell is that Neith had a particular sort of, what have we got on here? Got anything? Just scribbles? Yep. So it was Neith, and she had a sort of, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like bows on a shield or something as her thing. And she was the god of goddess. Sorry, I'm trying to write and speak and think at the same time. That's a dangerous thing to do. Of the goddess in charge of mummification and so forth. And that was it. I didn't have books and books and books on Neith. I had a few books on the worship of Isis and the various Greek and Roman deities, but that was literally the only thing I had on Neith. So I wrote a Liber Astarte type invocation to Neith for that day, and then in the evening I did the invocation. I just lit a white candle because I had no other way of, and over that 6 months I ended up working with Neith, and that was all very well and good. I entered into a sort of adoration process, a worship process, a transactional process with the goddess, and at the end of the 6 months it came time to wrap that up, if you'll pardon the mummification pun there, to just wrap it up, and that was it. Now, just after, I can't remember, it was before that I'd been to Egypt already just as a younger man, and I'd spent like a month just wandering Egypt, particularly around Cairo and that area and the pyramids and so forth, just with a rucksack, just following in Aleister Crowley's footsteps, because I was really studying Crowley's life and so forth. So that was the story of Neith. Now, fast forward to after my marriage, and we took our son, and I'd always vowed that if I went back to Egypt, that I would do it like on a cruise or something, that I would have a far easier and better time than when I was just a young backpacker and basically squatting in places and overnight, getting into scrapes and all sorts of things. I was ill as well, quite violently, for about a week. A couple of guys that I was with, one from Canada, one from the States, wanted to take me to the hospital on one particular night because I was so ill. But that was only like 4 days, and then it just went. So I decided that the next time I went, it would be a far more civilized affair. Now, we went on this little cruise sort of thing, quite a cheap cruise, not a particularly fancy one, and it was in Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. I always get those two confused. But we had little things going on the boat, and we got to know some people, and we'd all sit out on deck and we'd talk, and then we'd get tranched off and walk through the boats and get off the Nile and go and see whatever the tour thing was for that particular day, and then get fed when we got back, and so forth. All very nice, and some party games as well in the evenings to keep us entertained and so forth, typical sorts of things. But one particular night, there was this sort of competition between some of the couples that they organised, and we had to do all silly sort of party games and things like that. But towards the end of the night, one of the party games, and I've got a photo of this that one of the staff took, that was a, what was it? It was a, who can make the fastest mummy sort of thing. And hello, Zosky Occultus. Yeah, it was who could make the fastest mummy. So the guys had to stand still. The partners, the women were given a toilet roll, and they had to, we had to hold the toilet roll close to us, and then our partners had to run around us, mummifying us with the toilet roll without breaking it. If you broke it, then you were out of the game. And my wife at the time managed to actually get a fair amount of mummification done. And it was good fun, it was really silly, and it was just one of the games, and there was a photo taken, and that was it. Forgot totally about it. And then about a month later, I suddenly realised that, oh my gosh, I spent a couple of weeks in Egypt again, and there was mummification. Oh my gosh, that is bonkers that happened. But it was one of many games. I'm sure there were plenty of other examples of mummification whilst one was in Egypt. Of course there were. But then I thought, hang on a second, let me just check something. And I looked at a map of Egypt, and I looked at the places that we were going through, and I worked out the day that we did that game on, and guess what the name of the place was that we were sailing by that evening? We didn't stop there, we just sailed by it when I was mummified. And you can guess, it was Sais. And that is how magic actually works. You cannot escape the binds you make when you make them magically. You're writing them, you're coding them into the universal structure, and they will echo through eternity. They really will bind you in strange ways, which is, again, why we don't just cast spells left, right, and centre to get what we want, or particularly necessarily follow the god or goddess. I'm just going to tell that story, yes, Marie, that we might originally feel that we need. Sometimes it's actually the more challenging or the more unknown deity that we might need to work with, a deity that we wouldn't even think to work with. For example, in the group, who would immediately think of working with Thoth, like the god of scribes and knowledge and words. And who would never think of working with Lilith? Who would never think of working with Zeus? Who would never think of working... Well, you can see where this is going. There's certain deities that will appeal to you and certain ones that won't appear to appeal with you. Well, magic is the binds you make. I think as well, Stardancer, that I like that sentence by Kircher on magnetism, which is the universe is bound by invisible knots. And he said it about magnetism, but I always apply that to magic, that the universe is bound by invisible knots. And magic is the art of tying and untying those knots without trembling the web of the string, if you like. Because, again, this is why we don't always do spells and magic, because you can sometimes untie a knot, and by the time you try and tie it together, if you haven't balanced all of the other stresses of the universe, it will rip it all apart and you won't be able to fasten it back together again in any other way. And it leaves a rift, a scar, a tear, what Kenneth Grant called an astral tangential tantrum in the universe. And there are certainly the lives of people I've seen messing with this sort of stuff, or even what I would call messing. They might be telling people they're doing it very seriously and stuff, and appear to take it seriously, but they are leaving behind scars and chasms and rifts and things like that in their life, and that can be quite notable. So I'd forgotten about all of that for a couple of years, and I was working at my dad's office as a trainee accountant, and I was implementing a computer system in the days when computer systems were brand new and they were only used for like accounting, certainly not for the uses that computers are used generally now. And I was working away at this engineering company in the middle of Derbyshire, and working away one afternoon, everyone had gone out for lunch. I was left by myself. I was just catching up on a bit of work, and there was a car park, and quite empty car park because everyone had driven off to go and get their lunches and stuff. And there was a ring on the doorbell, and there was a closed door downstairs to stop people just meandering into the office area. I went downstairs, opened the door, and there was this weird old gypsy lady. And I use the term gypsy because that's how I felt at the time. It's not a term I necessarily use now, but it was just how I saw this strange old woman with a sort of headscarf and a sort of wild look to her. And she had what appeared to me, in cinemas, they had them briefly when I was very young, but I don't think they had them like widely even when I was young, but they certainly had them back in the day, of those sort of ice cream vendor trays that someone would come down between the aisles at a intermission in the cinema, and you would all go in queue and get your ice cream or whatever from the person with the... And sometimes they have them with cigarettes, don't they, in clubs in America. Maybe they don't anymore, of course, but I've seen scenes in clubs where there's a person going round with a tray with cigarettes on it and stuff, and it's sort of hung around their neck. And this woman outside this office in the car park just had one of those with a sort of towel on it. And I was like, oh, what is it? And she said, well, yeah, it might have had a little light on. It might have had a little light on the one she had. But it was a very strange and very surreal. And I was really thrown by it because my head was in some implementation of a accounting spreadsheet or something. And I said to her, quite rudely, what is it? And she whipped this towel or whatever it was off this tray, and she had a load of like what seemed to me at first glance, and you'll already see what's happening in this, but I assure you, I was not in the Neath state of mind at all. I was just in a office clerk state of mind, if anything, computer programmer state of mind. And it was just what I saw with all of these rolled up things, like medical supplies. And I looked at it, and it was like for a first aid kit. And what it was a load of rolled up bandages, like a tray full of these packed rolled up bandages, like the swabs that you get and things like that from a hospital. And I just thought, obviously she's stolen them from somewhere and she's trying to flog them to an engineering company for our first aid kits or something. And I just looked at it and said, oh, go away. I haven't got time. We don't want that. We can't use that. And I sort of closed the door, went upstairs, sat down at the computer, started to do a bit of work. And I would guess it was about 36 seconds, maybe 37 seconds. It certainly wasn't a full minute, but it certainly wasn't immediately, that I suddenly realized that I had just turned away a living embodiment of the goddess Neath. And I just jerked out of the chair, span around, ran downstairs, opened the door to call her back from across the car park or wherever she had gone to. And of course, there was no one there. She had vanished. And I could see across the car park. I could see the car park from the window where I went back upstairs to sit, and I hadn't seen her. So unless she managed to get out of the area of the car park and my sight as I went down the stairs, my only other explanation is that she had literally vanished. Now, in my head, I just assume it was a strange old lady selling bandages on a whim to an engineering company to see if she could get some money, or just as a way of, in effect, begging, but doing it with some sort of transaction. But my head can tell me that, but everything inside me says, just like every single story, when the magician or the hero or the heroine turns away the guide or the goddess, or doesn't recognize their own deity trying to help them. So it was bonkers. But again, just a good example of actual magic. She was present, she was selling bandages. The goddess that I had worked with Libra Astarte was the goddess of bandages. That's all I knew about her. And there she was as a real living person, or through the avatar, I guess, of a normal person, making herself known to me. And I literally closed the door on her. But that taught me a lesson, and also it gave me this story to tell everyone else, that sometimes the divine magical life is right in front of us. It's right present all of the time, and it's more about the way we connect to it and relate to it and recognize it. That is on us. That is where our work can be, in rising in an increasing congruent, comprehensive and consistent worldview. So as we come back to the tarot, that we find this perfect point of movement and stillness and connection, that we realize that whilst the world appears to be change and movement and chaos sometimes, and challenge and the unknown and things like that, things we feel we can't predict, i.e. fortune, fate and luck, and Waite also writes about that actually we can just take an adjustment to our awareness, our asana, our position, our mental, spiritual position, and find that still point anytime we want, any moment where we can actually just take a breath, connect to reality, and say, right now everything is still. And time is the moving likeness of eternity, but generally it is, and in reality it is still, it is present, it is this moment, and that moment is forever. So there we go. That's the story of the wheel and the goddess Neith, and the fact that with things like Liber Astarte, it's really important to do them as a practice for yourself and have those experiences, because those are the teaching experiences in actual magic. There are far too many people I see these days, and again, I'm sorry to be a old man waves fist at clouds sort of person on this, but if I'm aware of the amount of time it takes to prepare a proper video, not necessarily a live video, but a almost documentary style video, a long form video as it's called, and I can see the people doing it in the occult sphere, the sort of bro sphere of occultism, and I can imagine how much time that's taking them, even with a group of people assisting them, even with a separate editor and things like that, if they're making enough money from their channel and so forth to be able to do that. It still takes a lot of their time. And I know that they cannot be using that time to do the actual work, because all of the time is going into talking about it, performing it, and so forth. I guess my only advantage is I started when I was 12 and I did it every day, and it's been a long time since then. So I can afford to spend a little bit of time talking about it, but sharing the actual experience of it. But what is more important is that you have that experience, and that if I can tell you anything, it is that A, it works, B, it is important, at least as far as I'm concerned. You will have to be the judge of that. And C, that it is hidden in the work itself. The occult can never be unocculted, because it is occult. The esoteric can never be unesotericized. No matter how much I explain it, that is not your experience. And your experience is where you find your connection to the wheel, because my connection to the wheel in everyday life might be over here. It might be with this deity, it might be with that one, it might be through that element, or whatever it may be. I'm in a different position on the wheel. In the apparent world, in the Asiya world, in the Yetzirah world, and so forth, we all have our own unique knot. I guess going back to the world is bound by invisible knots. And so we can share the means of our undoing, but we can never replicate those means, because we are all unique knots in the apparent world. It is only when we get a little bit further in the journey that we come back to look on those knots and realize that everyone is undoing the same knot at the end of the day, or the end of an everlasting day, if you like. And you can teach people how to undo and recognize knots in a particular order, but you can't necessarily teach them or get them, force them, help them. I don't know if you tried to help someone undo a knot, but quite often you end up going, get off, I'll do it. And you tend to end up, well, you might undo their knot, but they're not going to be able to undo it the next time. Or a more complex knot, because they haven't learned anything from undoing it themselves. So I guess there's a mechanism in that. Does that make sense? Okay, question from Tony. That's good. You mind if I ask, what was the pivotal point in your life from your early years to follow the path you are on? Well, I've talked a little bit about this, but I don't think I've shared. I only started to share this recently because I only started to see the relevance of it in some sort of contextual way that I thought might be helpful to explain to people, because unless you have some sort of review or consideration of your own work, then sometimes when you try and explain it to people, you're not going to do it in as helpful a manner to those people as possible. And I always try and wait until I've thought about if it's going to be of use to people, I guess, to share things. And one of the things that inspired me, in a sense, is that my birth mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that didn't happen until I was about 15 or 16. So my early years were being brought up with a schizophrenic mother. Now, how much of the symptomology she had prior to the diagnosis, I'm not sure. I don't remember much of that because it was quite chaotic. So I believe in retrospect that part of my upbringing led me to be really interested in what the hell was going on, what was real, what was communicable, what made sense, why certain things didn't seem to make any sense. So I was trained from birth, in effect, to question what the universe was presenting to me, because when we are developing, it is our parents, particularly the mother for a lot of people, who defines our reality for us. And if you have an imperfect narrator, a uncertain narrator, an untrustworthy narrator of your own reality as you're being brought up, then you are going to, or in my case, get interested in figuring out what the hell is going on behind what people are saying, behind what people think is real. And I think that's what really drove me into an interest into occultism. It was the mystery of it, I think, and also the fact that no one else was interested. I became interested in things that no one else was interested, I guess, to find my own uniqueness. I wanted to be different because I felt different. And I tell you one thing that maybe some people in the group have had a similar experience as this. I remember very clearly in a cafeteria at school, looking around, and I must have been about 11, and I was looking around and watching everyone running around, playing with each other, doing all sorts of things, and talking about what they were going to do with their pocket money and the weekend and things, and what their family was doing. They were going to Alton Towers, a theme park, or whatever it might be. And I remember as clearly as anything thinking, have I missed a lesson? Had my parents not told me something? And certainly my mother wouldn't have been capable of telling me this anyway, but I didn't realise that until many, many years later. I felt I'd missed a big lesson because everyone seemed so certain. Everyone seemed so sure. No one seemed to be questioning what the hell was going on. Or could they be certain that what they were doing was the right thing, or the important thing, or the thing that they were meant to be doing? And I felt so uncertain about that. I literally thought that either my parents had missed telling me something that every other parent had told their children, or that I'd missed an entire term or class at school where everyone was told, this is your role in life, this is what you're going to be doing, this is the truth, this is the certainty, and you can get on with going around about your life now. Yeah. So I think for a lot of us interested in esotericism, occultism, the bizarre, the unknown, the mysterious, I think it's a little bit different now because it's become so performative and rewarded for being performative by clicks and likes and adverts and sponsorships and all of these sorts of things. But for an actual magician, it is very much that questioning of uncertainty and curiosity. And I think that's what drives us, isn't it? That curiosity and that uncertainty to think about life, the universe, and everything. And then we eventually get interested in things that are questioning that certainty. For example, magic, the New Age, auras. There's some gateway for each of us into that world. For me, it was tarot, and that's partly why I guess tarot became a thing. I always ask students as well, when was the first time they encountered tarot? Because quite often that shapes how they then go about their approach to tarot. For me, I encountered tarot in a school lesson when we had a New Age teacher come into our school and teach us for a whole afternoon in religious studies, tarot, dowsing, astrology, and a few other things. And that's what got me fascinated in tarot. And as a result, I always associate tarot with education. Hence, I ended up writing books on tarot or teaching tarot, and that's all I wanted to do when I started to try and connect to myself. And I think for a lot of us, if you think about when your first encounter was with the esoteric, then sometimes there's a lot more in that context, the way it happened, particularly if it happened when you were younger, that helps you think about how much that has shaped your engagement with it, the nature of your engagement with it. And I think that's quite an interesting route to go down. So to answer Marie, 2 questions, Symbolarium. Okay, so the Symbolarium is our Instagram subscription, and it is only available on mobile devices on the app, and I didn't know that to begin with. Also, it's not available, for example, in Australia, because I don't think they've rolled it out everywhere. So it is a little bit clunky. If you can't locate the earlier posts on the Symbolarium, it might be worth doing a Google search. I'll have a look. I can't promise to actually have time in the next couple of weeks, unfortunately, to have a look at that. But I would investigate whether that's some sort of glitch with the system, not something you're missing, basically. So it isn't, it's very clumsy. If I try and go and look at the subscription list on my app, I have to go through about 5 screens and 2 scroll downs to find that information. It's almost as if they did add it as a bit of an afterthought, or it was something they were going to try. And because it's not really taken off as much, for example, YouTube, everyone's used to subscriptions, paying for subscriptions, Patreon and things like that. But I don't think a lot of people are actually aware that that is also available on Instagram. And we had a lot of difficulty telling people about it because it's not really obvious where it is and so forth. So don't think it's just you. It may be something that is a bit glitchy with the system. And in terms of getting the orders in the US, I think Shay's sent them all out now, so you should be getting them. There was a delay for 2 reasons. One is that we were waiting for some extra boxes to arrive so Shay could send them out in good condition and so forth. And the other thing was that then Shay was a bit poorly, and so there was just a little bit of delay added in. Shay's usually really good at sending everything out far sooner than I did. This was an unusual situation in that I got mine done in the UK really quickly because I knew that I had to get them out before I started moving my entire house around and into a storage container maybe. So it just happened to be the other way around. Shay's usually a lot faster than I am. They haven't been missed. I think Shay has got all of them. There's some that have come in last week that I do need to send her. So, yeah. And, right, so there was another question. Oh, yeah, just for Star Dancer. For some reason, I would like to know what you would have said to the lady if you'd found her with Neith. What I would have done is I would have bought as many bandages as I had money in my pocket to buy. That's what I would have done, because in the grimoire tradition, we are told never to haggle over the price of a black hen. And that's so important as a teaching in occultism. And we'll leave on that note that never haggle over the price of a black hen in life generally, and particularly in occultism. A black hen is sometimes an ingredient for a grimoire spell, usually to sacrifice it in some way or another, or to use its feathers or beak or something. And if you go to the market and there's only one trader with a black hen and they say, I want everything you own and the house, then that's what you give them. Because if it's worth doing a spell for, it is worth everything in your life. And this is really, I guess, a sort of message I'm giving myself at the moment. If there's something important that you are doing, it is worth everything in the end. So we never haggle over the price of a black hen. So if I'd have had £1 in my pocket, I would have bought £1 of bandages from her and thanked her and said, good luck to you. If it was a path working or a vision or a lucid dream, I would have said, is there anything I can do for you to at this time? Is there anything I can do for you in my life at this time? That's something that quite often we ask inner parts of the universe through path working, inner guide meditations, lucid dreaming. And the other thing is, which wouldn't have applied in this case, is do you have a gift for me at this time? Because quite often in a path working or in a guide meditation, the entity will give that person a gift, and it could be a handkerchief or a medallion or a little model of an animal. It can be all sorts of things, but that will have deep meaning unconsciously and magically and astrally for that person's knotting and unknotting. Okay, everyone, thank you for being here again this evening. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Again, any questions, just drop them into the chat over the weekend or into the community area of the YouTube channel. And obviously, I'm fairly public on Facebook if you want to get hold of me as well. We will be doing one next week. Hopefully next week I will know whether I'm going to have to go and stay at somebody's house or whether I have a very small property that is actually local or slightly bigger property that is slightly further away than I want to be. So, okay, excellent. And incidentally, if I get the smaller place, I'm going to call it the Lodge of the Hen's Teeth, because they are as rare as hen's teeth. But if someone wants to sell you a hen's tooth, then you do not haggle over the price that the universe is asking of you, because it will ask you the fair price for whatever is most important to you. So, and thanks, Tony, for the moderation. Excellent job. And there will be one next week. After that, well, I'll advise next week as to how long it will be before the next one. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend. And as ever, the worker is hidden in the workshop.